Hello there and welcome back to another video. In today's video, I've got a bit of an unconventional device for this channel, but it's one that I think you all may still find quite interesting. This is a PlayStation 4 Pro, and it belongs to my friend. Right now, this thing is completely broken and won't turn on at all. So today, I'm going to be seeing if I can fix it. I got straight to work trying to take this thing apart. My friend had previously opened it up, and he hastily reassembled it before giving it to me, just so that he didn't have to give me a box of parts. However, it's not fully reassembled because it was easier for him to just throw it together and hand it off to me, so that's why I'm missing some screws and some plastic covers, if you're wondering. Moving on though, you might be wondering why I'm not following a regular troubleshooting process when working on this console, as the first step in fixing something should always be to recreate the problem yourself first, instead of just jumping into taking it apart, right? Absolutely, but I'm actually skipping that step today, and that's because I know exactly what's wrong with this console. You know how my friend had taken it apart before giving it to me? That's because he had it apart so that he could replace the thermal paste in it. However, when he opened it up and removed the power supply, he yanked on the wire that connects the power supply to the motherboard, which handles a 5-volt rail as well as some signals that are critical for the PlayStation to turn on. And when he yanked on it, he pulled the connector clean off the motherboard. So hopefully it makes sense now as to why I'm not doing any troubleshooting on this console. It's because I know precisely what's gone wrong and how to fix it. I also know for a fact that this is a really big issue for this console because, as I just mentioned, this will cause it to not turn on at all. So when I'm going to be testing it, all I'll be looking for is for the console to power on and boot up. After removing several parts from the console and fighting with the top plastic cover for way too long before realizing that it unclips from the front as opposed to the back, it was disassembled enough to give me access to the power supply. I removed the PSU and got my first in-person look at the damage that had been done to the connector and the motherboard. And yes, this connector was soldered directly onto the motherboard, sadly not some cheap daughter board. Hence, a replacement board would be pretty dang expensive. Anyway, you can see the way that the connector is fully detached from the board and how it took every single solder pad for the connector with it. Yeah, that's quite a lot of damage. However, it's really not as grave as it looks at first glance. The traces that connected to the plug are quite thick and quite straightforward in their routing. Plus, although a significant portion of these traces has been ripped up, there's still a lot of trace that might be available to solder to. And while I continue taking the console fully apart so that I can work on the motherboard more freely, let me quickly tell you about today's video sponsor, PCBWay. If you're interested in the kind of repair that I'm about to attempt, that is a PCB level repair, there's a solid chance that you might be interested in PCBWay's services. PCBWay is a custom manufacturing company that offers several services such as 3D printing, CNC machining, PCB production, and many others. In particular, I think that their PCB production services are incredibly relevant to anyone interested in doing work in this field. If you want to turn your prototyped project into something more professionally built, or even if you just want a basic PCB for SMD soldering practice, PCBWay is the place to go. Their pricing is very reasonable, and the ordering process is amazingly simple. Check them out at the link in the video description. Anyway, I've got the board out of the PlayStation and under my microscope. So now we can finally see just how torn up this board is, but at the same time, how fixable it should be. Before going too far with the board itself though, I used my soldering to clean off the remnants of the motherboard that were still connected to the connector's pins. Thankfully, the connector itself is completely intact. If it wasn't, I would have had to order a new connector, and that might have been difficult to find. But since I'm able to reuse this connector, we're good to go. I lined up the cleaned up connector on the motherboard to see how it would have been mounted normally, as it's important not to flip its orientation when deciding how to solder it back. I was able to see that I could just scooch the connector about 3 to 4 millimeters down the board and solder it back in place. And although this motherboard pokes through a very small hole in the metal case, the hole should still be big enough to fit the relocated connector properly. Even if it doesn't, the hole can also always be enlarged with something like a file. In order to remount this connector though, I had to scrape off some of the solder mask from the remaining traces and the copper ground plane on the motherboard to basically create new solder pads, as the original ones were gone. Then, after tinning the newly created pads with the help of some flux, I was able to solder the connector back into place on the motherboard perfectly. Now, although this connector should work as is, there is still one more step to this repair that I want to do. The motherboard is quite structurally compromised from its prior trauma, and so it would be wise to secure the resoldered connector to the motherboard with more than just these solder joints. With the help of some regular old super glue, I was able to lock the connector and solder joints made on the fragile traces into place, and everything should hopefully be functional and durable once again. I reassembled the console just enough to the point where I could test that it turns on and gives a display, and just as I had expected, it powered up and gave a display signal perfectly. That was a really satisfying repair, and my friend is super happy that he's got his PlayStation back in working order without having to purchase a new motherboard. And although I've managed to make a decently straightforward fix into a pretty long video, all things considered, I wanted to do this to show you guys how even if you do damage to a PCB when working on a device, it's not always the end of the world. Sure, sometimes some damage is too extreme to be worth fixing, but a lot of the time, with some patience and the right tools, you can resurrect a board you might usually write off as being completely toast. Hopefully this video made this kind of repair feel more accessible to those of you who may be new to doing this or who may have never even done this before at all. Although there's a truly lovely community of people who gatekeep board level repair and micro-soldering and who dunk on people for trying it while also never offering to teach them, I wanted to show how doing these kinds of repairs is actually something that anyone can do, and you should definitely consider attempting it if you're feeling up to the task. Well, that's all that I have for you in this video. I hope that you were able to at least enjoy it and maybe even learn a thing or two. In any case, I hope to see you next time. Goodbye.